Prior to the Paris attacks, I spoke with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, one of America's leading Muslim scholars, who's been at the forefront of efforts to counter the ISIL narrative and stop young Muslims in the US from going out to join what he calls the nut jobs. I began by asking him how worried he is about the allure and appeal of groups like ISIL to Muslims living in the West.
You know, I don't think their influence is anywhere near as widespread as people think it is. I think the vast majority of Muslims in the United States are very opposed to ISIS.
The FBI are pretty worried, though, of course. They say 200 Americans have gone out to fight for militant groups in Syria, including ISIL. And here in the US, between May and July of this year alone, they arrested and charged, I think, 25 people with connections to ISIL and other banned groups. In 2014, they arrested and charged 20 people over the whole year, 25 in just 3 months.
Out of over 10 million people, that's still a highly insignificant number, Mehdi, and I think you should be aware of that. There is a concern, it's a security concern, but don't forget also that some of these people are actually not going to join ISIS, but they're going to join what they consider to be a legitimate opposition in Syria. And so I think, you know, they're being lumped in as one group, but the truth is there are a lot of different factions in Syria that are fighting, and some of them are actually supported by NATO states.
Those are both very fair points. You gave a khutbah, a sermon, in September 2014, condemning ISIL, using Islamic scripture, sayings from the Prophet Muhammad, and it went viral online. Let's hear a clip from that sermon.
There's confusion. We have people in this country going overseas. It is hard to believe, but there's people going to join up, to join the Khilafah. This is a madness, complete insanity.
My question is this. Why are they going out there, the ones who are going to join ISIL? What's the reasoning in your view? Is it merely an issue of mental health, of insanity, or is it something within Islam? Is it a problem of so-called Islamist ideology, or is it a foreign policy issue, or is it young people looking for identity?
I think, Mehdi, you've summed up, I think, a lot of the factors here. Some of it is definitely mental health issues. I think there really is more mental health in a lot of these. I mean, we had a man who flew an airplane into an IRS building after writing a political screed, and yet he wasn't called a terrorist or politically motivated. He was called mentally ill. There are many examples of people doing these things in the United States, and they're always classified as mentally ill people. And yet, when Muslims do insane things, and many of these things are actually quite insane, they're categorized as terrorists. So I think we have a double standard, but undeniably there's certain people that it's been a kind of romanticized version of this idea of the caliphate and the restoration of the caliphate after its fall in 1922 or 24, depending on which time limit you're going to look at in Ottoman Turkey history. But the fact is that the group ISIS emerged as a response to a lot of the Shia atrocities of militia against Sunni villagers.
And yet, at the same time, as you say yourself, there is a romanticization of this ideology of a caliphate. There is clear sectarian hate. They're not just killing Shias, they're killing Christians, they're killing Yazidis. How do you tackle that core ideological bent for some of these fighters out there?
You have two factors here. One of them is a takfiri ideology, this idea of anathematizing Muslims, of considering Muslims to be outside of the faith. That's one issue. Then you have this provincialism, this attitude towards Christians and Jews and Yazidis and other peoples that Muslims historically have lived in peace with and protected and preserved their churches, their synagogues. This is one of the first times in Muslim history where these atrocities have been committed against religious minorities. So the idea that this has something to do with normative Islam is not acceptable. But as you know, we're living at a time when Islam is whatever anybody who wants to says it is. This is the kind of nominalist attitude that a lot of modern people have. I don't think we can say completely that it has nothing to do with Islam. Obviously, these people are motivated by scripture, which is clear in their publications and things like that. But again, it's a type of Protestantism, and I'm not talking about modern Protestantism. I'm talking about when the Protestants revolted against Catholic tradition. This created the religious wars of the 17th and 18th centuries. You have a lot of people opening the Quran, finding verses in there that can be decontextualized or